huomenta päivää. Se vielä on niin intensiivistä, että ihan aamumoodissa. Vielä muutama tulossa, niin otetaan ihan hetki.
Niin alkaako nyt toimia? Se on yhteydet on päällä. Hyvä, kello on 5, taitaa olla jo kokonaista minuutin yli, mutta tervehdys kaikille. Ja muutama voi siis olla vielä tänne tulollaan, mutta muuten hienoa, että te, jotka olette paikalla, niin olette sen valinnan tehneet. Ja siellä sitten virtuaalisesti on myös joukko mukana ja tervehdys teillekin. Jotenkin katselen teitä, niin hyvin tämmöinen perustuttu fiilis. Jorin kanssa hyvinkin syvää ja sitten Jorin kanssa vähemmän syvää ja jonkinlainen kohtaaminen kuitenkin kaikkien kanssa takana. Ja nyt en tiedä ketä siellä on, mutta tervehdys teillekin. Peter tässä mun vieressä, niin mä en tiedä, sulla on ihan vähän eri kulma kuitenkin, vai onko eri kulma? Onko nämä kaikki sulle tuttuja?
Ei ole ihan kaikki.
Niin. Mutta varmaan jokunen sana kohta siitä. Lähinnä siis semmonen hyvä tietää alkuun, eli David on tuossa seinän takana ja häneltä loppuu joku webinaari 17.30. Hän juoksee sieltä suoraan tänne ja on ollut siellä koko iltapäivän tekemässä omia webinaarejansa, eli hän on kiireinen mies. Ja tässä vähän niin kuin viritellään ensiksi ja sitten tosiaan kun David tulee, niin annetaan hänelle saman tien sitten ikään kuin areena, niin ei tarvitse enää lämmitellä sitten sen kummosemmin. Oikeastaan nyt tässä on sen verran eri vaiheessa nyt näitä tuttuja suhteessa tähän alumnijoukkoon tai Coaching House BoMentis-kuvioon, että nyt kaikille vielä virallisesti tiedoksi, että vuoden alusta on nyt siis selkeästi vain yksi brändi, joka on BoMentis Coaching House, eikä niin, että on 2 erillistä nettisivua, jotka elää omaa elämäänsä tai rinnakkaiseloa, vaan nyt ne on sitten kaikki yhdessä samassa, niin se on jotenkin tämmöinen tietty niin kuin mielikuvan rakentamisen vaihe. Ja tosiaan ollaan ylpeitä siitä, että David tänne tulee ja tuossa kerroinkin tuossa jollekin, että havahduttiin siihen, että jos me pari kertaa vuodessa David tänne lennätetään ja yhtä päivää varten, että voisi hyödyntää hänen täällä olemistaan näin muutenkin. Ja siksi tämä ikään kuin aktivoitu ja heitettiin vaan ilman, että mistä sä haluaisit tänään, niin kuin, tai nyt jotenkin, mikä on sulla niin kuin päällimmäisenä aiheena. Ja hän nosti tämän Teams of Teamsin siitä. Ja mitä kaikkea se hänelle tarkoittaa ja mikä se kuvio on, niin kohta kuullaan siitä lisää. Mutta ennen kuin mennään sisältöön, niin tietysti pitää orientoitua vähän nyt piirun verran aina tähän niin kuin lähiryhmään. Ja saatte siihenkin kohta pienen virittäytymistehtävän, mutta kun sä nyt tuossa vielä jaksat seistä vieressä hiljaa, niin sano nyt jotain. Niin. Mitäs haluaisit sanoa? Heitän pallon.
Joo, ei jotenkin niin tässä sillassa niin kiteytyy mun mielestä aika hienosti pari ihan niin fundamentaalista asiaa, että miksi mä ylipäätään olen tällä alalla. Varmaan tai 2006, kun mä niin lähdin opiskelemaan tähän näin, silloin sitä firmaa pistin pystyyn ja ajattelin jotenkin, niin kuin, että ryhmät ja se, mitä niissä tapahtuu, niin se on se kaikista kiinnostavin asia mulle. Halusin ymmärtää jotenkin sitä, että minkä takia osa toimii, osa ei toimi. Nyt kun mä ajattelen niin tämän illan teemaa, vielä sen enempää menemättä siihen, mutta kyllä mä niin aika vähän naivistikin ajattelin siitä, että aika niin yksinkertainen oli se mun käsitys siitä, mistä lähdettiin liikkeelle. Ja jotenkin sitten se on elämä kuljettanut johtajuutta, tiimien kehittämistä, coachingia kaikissa eri muodoissa, sekä niitä hyviä tiimejä, joista sitten vielä parempia hyviä esimiehiä ja niistä parempia, että sitten siellä ihan pohjamudissa rypeviä tahoja, jotka sitten viimeisellä metreillä hakee jotain tukea. Niin tällaisesta lähtökohdasta sitten on ponnistanut tänne.
Joo. Ja aika pitkälle nyt tässä joukossa on niitä teitä coaching-koulutuksen käyneitä ja sitten jotenkin hieno fiilis siitä, että ollaan myös tämä tiimicoaching-koulutus saatu liikkeelle ja täällä on teitäkin muutamia sieltä, eli erityisesti tämä niin tiimiteema on nyt meillä hyvinkin hot topic tässä. Ja taisit muuten tänä aamuna, vai koska sä sanoit, tänä aamuna tuli Peterin suusta, että pitäisikö kirjoittaa kirja tiimicoachingin työkaluista.
Niin, joo.
Ja katsotaan syntyykö siitä jotain, mutta ehkä ainakin aie on niin kuin heitetty ilmaan. Mutta se on kuitenkin selvästi sellainen aihe, joka tämä tiimien valmentaminen, tiimien coachaus, tiimit, joka nyt elää.
Joo, ja se on jotenkin, niin kuin huomaa vielä niin kuin siellä niin kuin
Mä katselen saman aikaan koko ajan muuten kännykkää, joku nimittäin nyt, joo, käypäs hakemassa
niin
sieltä
johtamispuolella jotenkin huomaa, että kun jos esimiesvalmennuksia jolla on tehty X määrä, niin koko ajan se huomaa, että tulee se, että miten mä johdan tiimejä. On havahduttu siihen niin. Että jotenkin siinä mielessä niin kuin kaksi puolta ehkä, tai niin kuin valmentava johtajuus, valmentava esimieheys, mitä se tarkoittaa tiimin näkökulmasta, plus sitten me ulkoiset coachit, miten me ymmärretään oikeasti niin kuin sitä dynamiikkaa ja kehittämistä ja ehkä sellaista niin kuin taustafilosofiaa siitä, että mitä me ollaan tekemässä, jos me tehdään tiimien kanssa töitä.
Kyllä. Mut hei, nyt te olette siinä nelikkona, jossa on jonkinlainen tuttuus oletettavasti ja sitten on vähän vierautta, toivottavasti. Niin mä varmistan vielä, että ehkä eniten mulla kysymysmerkkiä liittyy teidän pöytäkuntaan, että onko teillä riittävästi nyt siinä on niin kuin yksi vähän vieraampi, niin 3 vähän tuttua. Te olette aika hyvin ristiinpölyttyneitä, että silloin kuitenkin te olette ihan täysin lähes, eikö se ole? No me on teillekin te kaksikko, eli nyt varmaan aika hyvin nyt tätä erilaisuutta löytyy. Mutta hei, tehdään semmoinen kierros, että jokainen, kun coachia olette, kysykää yksi kysymys, johon kaikki 3 vastaa. Ja näin me tehdään kierroksia siis 4. Ja samalla jotenkin niin kuin riippuen sen tuntemuksen tasosta, niin miettikää kysymys sen mukaan.
Eli kaikki 3 muut.
Joo, eli sinä kysyt ja kaikki 3 vastaa samaan kysymykseen. Sitten mennään seuraava kysyy ja taas sama kysymys ja sama kysymykseen vastaa 3. Eli nyt kannattaa miettiä, mitä kysytte. Antakaa systeemin palaa tai synnyttää jotain keskustelua, ainakin kysymyksiä. Ja teille siellä etänä vielä sanon sen verran, että tosiaan puolelta virallisesti sitten tuutte niin kuin kärppänä, mutta siihen asti se vähän niin kuin viritellään. Mutta olkaa hyvä.
Oliko se?
Okei, nyt tässä kohtaa kierros on kesken. Olemme tietoisia siitä ja joku kehtii 1 tai 2 ja joku 3. kierrosta menemään, mutta kaikki ei nyt vaan ehtinyt kysyä kysymystä. Mutta kestättekö te sen? Ehkä just. Tässä on tietysti nyt pieni paralleeli-ilmiö siitä, että tässä on pieniä teamsejä nyt tässä vähän niin kuin syntymässä. Tässä meidän päivän teemaan liittyen, jossa on Team of Teams. Sitten niin kuin iso teema, mutta nyt seuraava pieni porina siitä, vielä se 5 minuuttia tässä aikaa, niin kun kohta mestari tulee tuolta, niin mikä sun esikäsitys on? Mistä tässä on kyse? Team of Teams. Pähkääkääpä sitä. Olkaas hyvät. Okei, nyt alkaa olla kohta puolin nyt siellä jo takit tyhjänä, ainakin määrittelyt. Mennään jo Googlen äärelle, että löydetään oikeita vastauksia. Se kertoo jo silloin aika epätoivoisesta tilanteesta. Ei vaiskaan, se oli 4:30. Näin juuri. Joo, se on ihan ok. Mutta okei, tässä joitain täältä varastettiin, kun kuunneltiin teidän tarinoita Peterin kanssa. Eli siellä selvästi näitä elementtejä, että onko se tämmöinen niin kuin huipputiimi vai onko se niiden tiimien summaavia yhteistyötä, jonkinlainen niin kuin kombo se on ilmeisesti on, jossa tiimit on keskenään jonkinlaisessa yhteistyössä ja ehkä vielä voisi olla yksilönkin näkökulma, jos yksilö työskentelee sitten ehkä useammassa tiimissä ja jonkinlainen yhteinen päämäärä siellä taustalla. Joo, ja on myös, että ei mitään ideaa, vai mitä?
Varmaan niin voisi kuvitella, että aika monimutkaisesta ilmiöstä on kyse.
Joo, mutta se on selvästi niin.
Tiimit yhdessä, yksilöt yhdessä, tiimisuoritus.
Mutta varmaan se ihan se originaali niin kuin ero on siinä, että nyt me ei olla niin kuin yhden yksittäisen tiimin suorituksen äärellä. Se on niin kuin oma juttunsa, kuinka se yksi tiimi ja siihen liittyvä systeemi alkaa elää huippuutta. Mutta sitten nämä muut on jotenkin enemmän tai vähemmän sit siinä, että kun onkin useampi tiimi ja miten näistä sitten se jonkinlainen kombo niin kuin syntyy, jossa se verkko elää niin kuin vielä Team of Teams -maailmaa. Mitä se oikeasti tarkoittaa ja miten sitä on ajattelussa viety eteenpäin. Siis se tausta, muistaakseni hait sen oikean nyt kirjoittajankin, sen käsitteen keksijän McChrystal, siis tämmöinen alkaida jenkkikaifari, upseeri, joka nimenomaan sitä tapaa, miten suhteessa tähän niin alkaida-verkostoon ja siellä toimintaan, niin sieltä se käsite jenkkiet yhteydessä sinne, niin siitä tämä lähti liikkeelle tämä käsite ja se on nyt saanut ilmeisesti jonkinlaista sitten jalostusastetta tässä organisaatiokontekstissa. Näin tulkitsen. Eli tästä myöskään mä en ole Davidin kanssa puhunut. Mä vaan heitin sille palloa, että mikä on sun hot topic tänään. Että tämä oli se vastaus ja mitään enempää keskustelua käyty. Eli jäädään se odottamaan, että mikä se oikeasti on.
Niin, ja jotenkin se ajattelee vielä, että tämä tasolla on se, missä niin kohtuullisen yksinkertaisesti helppo coach.
Niin, helppo ja helppo. Niin.
Joo, jos sä vertaat siihen,
kyllä.
tullaan tänne.
Niin.
Mitä se tarkoittaa, kun mä coachaan sellaisessa verkostossa, missä ei olekaan sitä niin perinteistä mallia olemassa, vaan se on semmoinen hämähäkki.
Just näin.
Ja tää on ehkä yksi asia, mitä toivoisin teidän kysyvän Davidilta.
Kyllä. Mutta hei, tehdään tässä nyt 5 minuutin kahvin täyttöjuttu, kun selkeän taas ollaan 1,5 tuntia sitten varmaan ilman taukoja, niin tehkää tarpeenne tai mitä haluattekaan lisää. Ja mä veikkaan, että nyt mä haen sen sieltä ja sen on pakko tulla sieltä, niin sieltä omasta kopistansa ulos. Niin jatketaan siis 5 yli nyt ton mittarin mukaan.
Joo.
Okay. Yeah. Right. I forget
No,
it.
it's good.
Yeah. So if we go back into ancient Egypt, the size of teams that took the big stones to build the pyramids, they were 8 people, typically on a boat. And what happened is you got teams of teams coming together because those stones were too big for 8 people to lift. So that you had teams of teams, people would get them off the boat, and each team would be around about 8 people, and it's a natural number. And this actually refers also, anthropologists now tell us that part of the reason for this is that we work most closely in teams of 8, because if you're out in the savannah hunting, the maximum number of people you can keep an eye on and be aware of and constantly be aligned with is another 7. Beyond that, it becomes more difficult. I don't mean in football you've got 10 plus the goalie, and so you're stretching it a bit. And I think one of the reasons, and that's why I think we see football tactics being you've got different shapes, which are usually 3s or 4s, where people are working together because you're breaking it down to sub teams in order to make the bigger team work. And it's that principle of sub-teams being part of a structure of teams that's fundamentally behind all organizations above a few people. The problem with team theory is that most of it has been based on basically the military concept, which was then refined by a guy called Rensis Likert, of the Likert scale, if you've come across that. And what Rensis basically said was, here you have a chief executive up here, yeah, and then reporting to the chief executive is a team of people. Sorry, it's this way around. It's a team of people, and they make up the executive team. And then from the executive team, you've got another team down here, and of course you've got one member in here, and then there's a bunch of people here. And then you've got another team here, where they may have 2 teams here, where you've got a linking pin. And these dark ones are all the linking pins. So you've got a structure here where authority and command, everything gets done by passing things up and down through these processes. The trouble is that if you've got a team over here with its nice leader over there, it doesn't talk to the team there. And so basically everything goes wrong when teams at different bits of the organisation have a different purpose and a different way of doing things. And so organisations constantly try and impose structures and rules and procedures that try and link everybody together. I mean, that's what HR is basically there for, to put rules that nobody wants to follow. But the whole process here, this is all very rigid. And the trouble is that if something goes wrong, if this leader doesn't communicate, isn't very good, then that basically this whole structure here collapses. And the idea of the briefing coming down from on top. As the briefing goes down, if this guy doesn't pass it on, or only puts bits of it on, then of course the briefing gets distorted. The further down you go, the less people are aware. Recent research at Sloan Business School found that basically they surveyed leaders or people, executives, and then several layers down below about their understanding of corporate strategy. So, what were the 3 or 4 most important strategic objectives of the organisation? First thing, horrifying thing was, in a significant proportion, I can't remember the exact number, but the significant proportion of the organisations, the top team weren't aligned, didn't have the same idea about what the top 3 priorities were. But across the board, the further you went down, you got 2 or 3 layers down, and there were totally random, almost random expectations about what the organisation's primary objectives were. Probably doesn't surprise you. But what's happening now in a VUCA world where everything's constantly changing, this doesn't work anymore. It's why organisations disintegrate. And I'm sure you could think of a few organisations that that have got into deep trouble simply because they've not been flexible enough to be able to manage this situation. So we get things like Agile coming in, and you're familiar with that, I'm sure. But the trouble with Agile is it only works for certain types of organisation or certain types of task. And a lot of the time, organisations like banks, for example, which have tried to put in Agile, it might work in the computer department, but it ain't going to work in HR. Now, in theory, it could, but it requires a completely different redefinition of what HR is there for. And the similar would be sales or finance or any other function. So the question is, how do we redesign organisations so that they are capable of rapid change and high degrees of alignment? And that's a big challenge. And that's where the concept of flocking comes in. So you've all seen the picture, a flock of birds suddenly changing direction, or a school of fish. Suddenly there's a shark and they all go in a different shape somehow to avoid the shark. How do they do it without bumping into each other? You put a bunch of people in a stadium, or in a theatre, and they're all trying to get out the exit. Do they act in coordination? No, they're constantly falling over each other. And then you get a stampede and things go dreadfully wrong. But people don't seem to have this ability to flock. You see actually vehicles are better at flocking than people, because you see vehicles, the traffic management systems slow the traffic down and get all the traffic going at the same speed, and somehow you get fewer jams and actually the traffic goes faster. So it's actually an application of flocking. And what the research says is that the way that birds or fish do this, firstly you have a degree of separation so that you are not too close to each other, you're going to bump into each other. So in a business team perspective, separation would be you've got some clearly defined roles. What is this team here to do? So there's not any confusion about your role. Then alignment, which in a flock would be steer towards an average heading. But so you basically know where everybody's going, and you switch direction to go in the same direction that everybody else is going. You instinctively know, you can tell, all right, they're going somewhere over there, not here. That's okay. And so you switch to go roughly in the same direction that everybody else is going. Doesn't have to be perfect because the system constantly self-adjusts in order to make to make that alignment closer and closer. Am I making sense, by the way? That makes a change. And then cohesion. So this is part. So you've got the short-term heading. Everybody's going this way, but the cohesion is about the long-term. So all being clearly going towards the same general purpose, in the distant purpose. So this would relate to the organisation or the mission of the collection of teams. Does that follow? Now, these are principles which are not normally used in the design of organisations. So if we think, well, I just like this quote. It comes to the idea: people make things happen. If they're not given the autonomy to make things happen within the confines of their existing organisation, they'll find somewhere else to do it. And the connection here is that if we restrain people by having too many rules and regulations, we can get them all to flock as long as nothing changes. But as soon as something changes, the rules actually get in the way. But if we actually give people the autonomy to be able to shift and change within the context of the flock, then they will do that. So there's a balance here between having some rules and having a great deal of autonomy to work out how we work within those rules. And then, so we have this concept we've created of streams of connectedness. And what we mean by this is that if you have a bunch of teams, and in this case, we're not going to see the teams. There may be a structure that defines where the teams go, but the teams will basically be like this within the organisation. Maybe some will be slightly outside the organisation as well. So you've got a bunch of teams with people in them. Some of these teams will be interconnected because they've got the same manager, for example. Frequently happens. There'll be all sorts of ways in which these teams connect with each other, but it's not. But the point is, it's random. It's all over the place. All of them can be connected with each other if you manage the streams of connectedness appropriately. So the key is to create connections between every team which are multiple connections, not single connections. So it's a bit like the brain. The brain works because the neurons are connected with lots of other neurons in a system. And exactly the same thing here. We're creating a sort of, going back to Stafford Beer, the brain of the organisation. So the 6 streams we've identified so far, and there are almost certainly more. So one is the collective vision. So what is it that we're all sharing, the purpose that we're all here for? What do we have in common that we're here for? So the old adage about putting a man on the moon would work very clearly in that context. It's a good example of that. The information or collective intelligence. So what's actually happening in the environment of this team is seeing the world outside, and it says, look, this is happening. We've got some artificial intelligence coming. How is it going to affect the rest of the teams? And so its understanding of the world outside can be imported rapidly. What tends to happen is this team here, it might be in research or whatever, yeah, this is great, this is useful, we use this to improve our processes, but we don't actually share the organisation. Probably the people up here who are making some financial resource decisions haven't a clue about this because there's too many other teams in the way. But if you've got these streams of connectedness, you go straight from one team to the other. The resources. How many times have you found that one team is oh God, thank goodness for a break for a while. You know, we don't have to. We can go out to the pub and have a nice long lunch, and you know, where another team is wondering how on earth it's going to complete all its work. The movement of resources. Our photocopier is broken down. Can we go to another department and use theirs? You know, in some organisations, that would be sort of like declaring war. So whole variety of issues there. invention. Somebody comes up with a bright new idea. How does it get to the rest of the system quickly? You know, it's no good if we wait till the next annual conference that we have or whatever. How does the team actually really make sure that a good idea is in everybody else's domain within days, or at least weeks? Voice, that's a fascinating. Me Too is a great example of voice. You know, lots of women feeling that they have an issue, but all of them feeling isolated and alone. Only when they come together do they have voice. So if you've got a bunch of people, all of who spread about here, you've got somebody here, and you've got somebody here, and you've got somebody here and there, but they're all individual voices inside teams, and they don't feel listened to. You bring them together, and suddenly they're able to make themselves heard. And very often, what these people observe is really important to the welfare and the ability of the team to work. We see it a lot in hospitals. You know, that when the accountants take more control, or the managers take more control, and the patient is forgotten. You know, and when patients are not getting, when things are going wrong for patients, but you're just an individual and you speak and nobody wants to listen to you. When you actually bring people together, you start to make a change. And regrouping. You know, how do we change structures? You know, we've got a new issue. Well, what typically happens is you've got people up here who say, well, which team should we give it to? You know, who wants responsibility for that? Whereas you can actually, when it's much more helpful to be able to say, actually, you know, let's create a new team and we'll put it here. And we can't take people permanently away from other teams, but you know, this is the project team. Let's make this work. And so you create new teams that fit into the structure automatically, and when they've done what they've got to do, you dissolve them. So the idea that teams have nice rigid boundaries around them becomes obsolete. Teams are constantly being shaped and reshaped according to the tasks that they have and the importance to delivering the collective purpose. Let me stop at that point. Does this make sense? What's your immediate reaction to that so far? Sorry.
Quite chaotic.
Yeah. Sounds like the real world to me. And I think that's the point. It's providing enough order on chaos to be able to function. So it's not about trying to create certainty, because certainty doesn't exist anymore. And half the problems we see in the world, the political problems indeed, things like Brexit, for example, are all about people trying to create a certainty that doesn't exist anymore. And so it's simplistic solutions to complex adaptive problems. We have this word we invented 30 years ago called simplexity. It's called simplexity is the art of making complex things simple but not simplistic. So seeing simple patterns that you can actually affect. So you know, all of this is basically around complex adaptive theory. Any other thoughts?
Does this type of working imply that people are or should be more or less occupied with the title, sphere of influence, or sort of prestige?
I think the answer is we can't afford it anymore. We just can't afford those behaviours anymore. They don't work, and they get in the way. One organisation I looked at, a public sector body, a local authority, basically needed to cut down the staff by about 50%, but managed to do so gradually. And the way that it did it was to guarantee people their jobs, but a job, but not necessarily the job. So in order to be retained in the organisation, they had to be flexible to be able to shift the role that they did, and combine roles and do other things. So as roles evolved, or the need for roles evolved, they had to go with that. If they couldn't do that, then there wasn't a job for them. but this basically, and the trade unions went along with this and supported it, that this was about, the job security now is not about the job title or the specific role. It's about actually being flexible enough to move and evolve your role according to the needs of the system.
How about then the role of the leadership?
Well, this is one that I think fascinating. I spent 18 months trying to find a single article that told me actually what a leader does. Yeah, an evidence-based academic piece. I could not find one. I eventually found one. Loads of them talk about traits of leaders and characteristics of leaders. But about what do leaders actually do? Just one. And there were 15 things that it found that a leader does. And then we've been working with groups, agile teams and other teams, ordinary teams, and we've been saying, okay, so how many of those 15 actually have to be done by an authority figure, by one of these link pins? Guess what they are? How many of those 15 need to be done by an individual authority figure? No. Smaller than that. Really? Yeah. 2, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. One of them was being the person who can sign off for getting resources from above or from outside. So you need somebody actually as the actual designated figure to do that. The other one, anyone like to guess? What was the other one that had to be done by an authority figure? No, the team could do that. Well, the organisation, but even then, it's a top team that does it. Yeah. No. No, very often, even that could be done by the team themselves. Sometimes you just make it clear that somebody's not wanted anymore. Usually, the great way is to just move the desks around so they don't have one. Don't laugh. They used to do that at McGraw Hill, where I worked many years ago. They actually did that. They moved all the office partitions around so that when somebody came back from holiday, they didn't have it. Henry Ford actually famously hinted gave a strong hint to an executive who annoyed him. The guy came in after the weekend and found his desk had been split and there was an axe still buried in it. I think that was a very strong hint. But no, the other one was very simple. It's protecting the team from interference from outside. And that was the other key function of a leader. Everything else could be distributed in whole or part to the team. So the way that we're looking at leaders now is leaders are enablers. They're people who create the environment where people can manage themselves rather than try and manage people. Life is too complicated. Even a team of 8, you can't be running around deciding what everybody should be doing. You have to create the environments where they make the decisions about what they're doing. And then you've got even performance appraisal has changed. it's modern performance appraisal forgets the team leader giving you feedback. What it does is make you go and gather your own feedback, present and come to your team leader for coaching around what you're going to do with the feedback that you've got, with your learning of your sort of task objectives for the next 6 weeks and your learning objectives for the next 6 weeks and how you're going to fulfill those. And the team leader coaches you through that. Only when when there's a real persistent problem do you go into discipline, but basically it's not from the performance appraisal. But you would take a much more hands-on role with somebody only when they cannot work within that new system. Completely different way of making things happen. So those are the streams of connectedness. I think they give us some real different ways of thinking. Please.
I have to disagree a little bit with the other function, because I noticed that especially in Finland, where we have a culture of quite democratic way of being, protecting team from outside influence here quite often happens through any part of the team.
Brilliant. Yeah, and then great. Then that puts it down to 1. And I think there is a strong cultural dimension here. Yeah, and it's the cultural expectations that drive a lot of this.
Very often specific expertise.
Yeah, yeah. If we're in China, most people would say that you get much more expectation of the role of the autocratic team leader. But what do we actually need to do? There's lots of examples, pretty much everything, and I'm glad you told me that, because yes, that fits with my own understanding of the culture. But we're talking generically here, but thank you for that. So if we look at collective identity, this is one of the things we can do is to help the system as a whole build collective identity. It's around the purpose. So this is an exercise that we've started to do, getting everybody in the team to, or every team, to create a narrative about what they're there for and how it fits in with the broader collective purpose of the system as a whole. And then once they share those narratives, you can start to see the differences between them and say, okay, well, how do we deal with those differences? How do we align them so that we all actually are seeing the same story? Swapping around of tasks. We always find that some teams have got tasks they avoid, and yet other teams would love to have those. But because we've got rigid descriptions about what teams do, we don't have the opportunity to move tasks around. But looking at the structure and building the structure of the whole around what people have energy for and competence to do is a much better way than trying to just create an artificial structure and say this group of people does this, whether they're any good at it or not, or whether it enthuses them or not. That's in a real team of teams, we actually start to break down those restrictions. The key performance indicators. Mostly, key performance indicators are based upon what you do as a team. You'll hit this amount of sales. You'll get this number of training manuals out, or whatever. They're all outputs related to how the team itself is required to perform, rather than what it contributes to the system. So it's taking away from a linear perception of output to a systemic perception of output. Does that make sense? Quite demanding, these concepts, aren't they? But this is the way we're going to have to think in the future. And then, so some of the things, sharing personal histories and team histories, so a bit more around the narrative. But where have you come to? How did this team become the team it is? Mostly, people have no idea in most cases. But just as people, you can sit in the same team of somebody as a team member and not know anything about their family life or their history, or who, the fact that they play piano or used to be in a football team or whatever. You know what I mean? Why would you know these things if you don't have those personal conversations? So building that connectedness by sharing the personal histories and the team histories. What are the values that each team has? You usually get the corporate values, the nice bits of the things you put on plastic to use to scrape the ice off the windscreen. But it seems if you use credit cards, it damages them. So you must. But the sense of what are the values? Where are our connected values? And what we find is if you get all the teams together and look at their primary values, and then say, okay, well, how does this kaleidoscope actually support the purpose? What can we do to actually support each other in maintaining the values? Which ones? How do we want to change the value system so that it's collective rather than as well as individual or individual team? How do we resolve conflict? Interesting one. Teams are in conflict for all sorts of reasons, often because the team leaders are at war. How do we actually, if there is any conflict going on with the team, do we actually have the ability to deal with it like that, or does it go on and fester? A number of organisations I've seen where marketing and sales hate each other. I've went into one where they hadn't, the head of marketing and the head of sales had not spoken to each other, even at team meetings, the Exco team meetings, had not spoken to each other for 3 years. Yeah. I mean, this is great for company unity, isn't it? If the team isn't spread virtually, you can have physical locations. So Reebok, when we did some work with them many years ago, the IT function found that nobody appreciated it, nobody loved them, and so not the IT, the finance department, nobody loved them. So what they did was to have a desk a temporary desk in each of the client functions around the company, and then once a week, one of the team members would spend a day working at that desk and talk to people. And surprisingly, it made an enormous impact in the reputation that the function had and how people understood and how cooperative people were, all of those positive things. And then a trust recovery process. That's an interesting one that it's the first time I've never seen the phrase used before at this work that we've been doing. But you know, when trust is broken down between teams, how do you rebuild it? What do you do to get together to actually bring trust back to a level that you can really feel that we can work together, we can rely upon each other? And the processes will be different in each case, but how do we actually have it as a key function, a key process within the team? I'll just stop there. You know, what's your thoughts so far?
I have a suggestion. Let's have them show discussion on the table with your parents. A table group reflection of whatever is in your mind after getting this started. A few minutes.
Yeah. Coffee. Yep, it's my life.
Did you turn it off
No.
Jos mä ymmärsin oikein, niin puheenjohtajassa, niin kyse oli nimenomaan niiden ohjausten
So, let's continue. Share some thoughts or questions, whatever you raise up. One topic or theme or whatever you discuss.
If we
How might you go about that?
We agree that it's very difficult.
Thinking of how these challenges, as you were talking about the status and the power and leadership, and how this actually is going up when people are people. So how the accountability and the trust really. How to create and build and kind of nourish that. So it's, we were like, oh, how to do that when the power struggle will come there at certain point.
Yeah. It's a lot of it's around the assumptions we make. I've just been doing a global webinar on supervision session, and one of the issues that was brought up was the chief executive trying to change her team, but the assumption she's got is that she's the authority figure and she needs to change them, whereas we explored this, actually, no, the responsibility for change lies with the whole team. And as long as she allows them the myth to be there, that it's her responsibility, nothing will change. So it's got to be a collective responsibility. And that's the tough one, because people may not want to take on that responsibility. Yeah. In which case, why are they taking such a big salary?
I'd like to ask about the structure you just brought. Is there a leader, named leader, that is stable in every team, or is the leadership changing ongoing growth?
It can vary, basically.
Yeah.
But it's the role of the leader within. So if there is a fixed leader,
Person can manage.
yeah. And it's what are they what are they doing there? What is their role? So we're focusing increasingly on leadership
Yes.
rather than the leader.
Yeah.
And how is leadership exerted?
Yeah. That's interesting.
How about you five in the team? What is interesting topic or question?
So we were talking about physical progress, how effective it is to know each team's proposition and culture, but perhaps it conflicts a bit about the productivity and the basic task you have to do. It's not so easy to perhaps to implement. So it takes time if you change your place and visit every team.
Yeah.
But perhaps we haven't tried that enough. Perhaps there are good ways to do it. And it was very interesting, the example you brought up.
I think we have to keep experimenting. This is all really quite new, in the sense that people have done all sorts of little bits and pieces of this before, but I don't think we haven't really seen any significant work to try and look at it from a comprehensive, treating it as a complex adaptive system. But if we go back far enough to Stafford Beer, writing in the 60s, looking at he was predicting a lot of this stuff, but have any of you come across Stafford Beer?
Write the name of it.
He was a wonderful academic who did a lot of work in Chile, but he saw he started off with the idea that an organisation was like a human body, and then he started working out from there. And, what did that actually mean? Well, now I think that he saw the brain of he called it the brain of the firm, and so the leadership was he saw the leadership. But of course, the brain is distributed. It's not just up here. The brain is actually distributed throughout the body, as we now know. So there's a whole lot of interesting metaphors to play around with here. But yeah, I think that with this diagram, you can create it in any way you like as long as it's flexible. But what we tend to do is to like to create nice, rigid organizational charts. But they're an impediment. You've got to have some sense of structure, but actually it's no coincidence, I'm sure, that the most ancient animal in the world that survived through all of the wiping out of the dinosaurs and everything is the jellyfish, where it doesn't have these rigid structures. I mean, I'm pushing the analogy a bit there, but but it is an interesting coincidence. Any other thoughts around this?
Maybe I could mention one thing that we sort of touched upon in the last part of the discussion. I think the digital age is sort of evolving with new tools and resources for acting in a team's environment. For example, I don't know if you're aware of a service called Slack. It's an example of an online service, a communication platform where people can communicate in real time on the basis of different themes or topics, crossing the team boundaries, and you can create new channels that handle new themes. So it's a rather quick way to reorganize around thematic questions.
Absolutely. And the addition to that principle is that we give, in each of these teams, there are people who are responsible for each stream of connectedness that you identify. So that you might, in an organisation, identify 10 streams of connectedness, things that where people need to know fast in order to bring about change across the whole system. So in each team, people have responsibility for one or two of those streams. And so that way, they would communicate between themselves. You'd have a Slack group that would particularly focus on that. It doesn't have to be Slack, there's other tools as well. But the digital technology enables you to do this without them all having to have a physical meeting. Sometimes a physical meeting is just what's needed, but a virtual meeting if they're scattered. But an email to round to everybody can be just as effective sometimes as having a formal meeting. We're going to have a meeting once a fortnight to discuss innovation. Well, okay, if that works, but actually maybe we have a regular exchange, a constant running. I've seen WhatsApp being used in this. A running WhatsApp on a particular theme. It's there. We just have to be creative and innovative about how we do it. So says he who can't actually manage to work Google Docs and go. Still struggling with that one.
The last bullet point. I mean, do you have any concrete example of trust process?
No, we've been searching. It's been mentioned multiple times in the organisation we've spoken to. Nobody's actually shown us one, and I think that's interesting. I mean, we could posit, make a proposal. We could try and design one. I mean, that's something. Maybe maybe we could do that in a minute. Just think about what would a trust recovery process look like. But yeah, shall I just finish off the slides that we've got? Maybe we can decide where we're going to focus. There's only a couple more slides. This is basically making these connections. Are you familiar with the Perel model?
Only few, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so Perel is a complex adaptive systems model of team function and dysfunction. So the principle behind Perel is that when all teams have a number of elements which interact with each other, and the team will be functional, more or less functional, according to how well those elements work together. But so P stands for purpose and motivation. E for external processes and systems, so how you get on with your stakeholders. R for relationships inside the team. I for internal systems and processes, like making decisions and communicating. Quality control. L for learning, how the team manages continuous learning, so how I manage to keep at least up with the learning needs from the environmental change, and L for leadership. And to give you an example, you've got some conflict going on between two people in a team. If you just try and bring them together and try and do some trust building between them and try and build the relationship, without addressing the underlying issues that have caused the trust breakdown in the first place, then it's not going to be very effective. And the probability is that breakdown in the relationship is due to different expectations by stakeholders, for example, or the stakeholders not providing enough resources, so they're fighting, squabbling over who gets the money to do what. It could be a failure in learning, for example, people not supporting each other's learning. There's all sorts of ways in which a relationship failure could be related to, is dependent upon other things. So if you just address the one issue, you're not going to solve it. You have to address the complexity, the multiple issues that are underlying any particular failure. And so that's the concept behind the pyramid model, and you can apply it straight to the whole system. So rather than just, do we as a team have a shared purpose that motivates us? Do we as a team of teams have a shared purpose that motivates us? Yeah. And all the way through, the relationships that we have, the external relationships. Which of our teams in our team of teams has connections outside of this structure? And there's probably several of them. So how do we make sure that the information that they get, or the relationships that they have with the external people, has a positive, is used positively within the team? Example, a team. You've probably got a public relation. Most large organisations have a public relations department. It usually has very few connections with the people on the shop floor. Let's take a retailer. So the people in retail who are actually selling things to the customers. But actually, it's the quality of the interactions that the shops or staff have with customers that has the biggest impact on the reputation. So how do you actually link those things together? So the external relationships there would have an impact on the internal processes of PR if they were allowed to, but normally they don't. So how can we improve the flow of work, information, and so forth? Then we look at where cross teams, so teams that link up within here. So you might have a sub-team that was like that. Well, it's fine. It's good. And that would, but how do you actually define these teams? And then every team appoints people to the sub-teams, and so forth. So you've got a mixture of teams, some of which are formal, some which are informal, but it's a constant grouping of people who are behaving in a team-like manner. And so part of the skill here is, do they actually understand the skills of teaming? When you put together 3 or 4 people from across the system, from different teams, do they automatically become a sub-team? Or are they just a group who happen to meet together? So there's a qualitative issue here. And then whenever anything goes wrong, the relevant sub-teams come together to figure out how to address the whole system. So normally you just give a project team something, fix this one, this particular issue, but only within the context of your immediate team. Now we're actually looking at how do you fix this issue across the whole system. So everybody gets a systems responsibility, not just a discrete team's responsibility. Okay? It's, again, as I said earlier, it's highly demanding. And one of the things that we've, it's just as simple as this. Just as we have a personal development plan and a team development plan, now we need a team of teams development plan that links all of the learning that has to take place in individual teams, and by individuals in the system, together into one big movement that actually aligns the learning that takes place. And that's the last slide, really. It's complex. It's hard to get one's head round, and it's going to be a while, I think, before organisations really go for this. But any organisation that does get this right is going to it's a big potentially a big competitive advantage. If they've got the right products and so forth and everything else, it's getting the people bit right is now increasingly the primary predictor of success.
Actually, one virtual participant said that there's one Finnish advertising agency company which is running kind of in the similar structure. I don't know the name of the company, but it's just a comment that there is some kind of understanding and implementation of this idea currently going on.
There's lots of, there's lots of individual examples of highly innovative companies, but they tend to be in advertising, in gaming, a lot of examples in gaming.
In Finland also,
Yeah.
game companies closer to this.
Yeah, and in one of the game companies, I forget the name of it, gives everybody 100% of their time to spend on projects that interest them. And clearly there are some other guiding rules around this. You can't just waste all your time for a year and produce nothing. But it's we can break most of the rules that we've set up for how organisations should be run. And as coaches, well, where does that? How do we work as coaches? So one of the roles is we go from individual coach, one-to-one coach, to team coach, now to coaching teams of teams. And Peter Hawkins and I are working on a book to cover on this area at the moment. It's fascinating. How do we actually gear ourselves up to be a coach for teams of teams, a coach to the whole system? And I don't have the full answer to that. Don't have even a partial answer to it yet. But I think that's the question I'd like to leave you with, to get you to talk about now. How do you make the transition? How can you be a coach to the whole system?
Excellent question, Joe. Shared. Easy. on?
It's off.
Okay. I will check. This is a little bit. Okay. Finalize your last sentence and then we will continue. Interesting stories. Pauliina, you have some interesting topic to share. What is the summary of whatever you discussed? Or what do you want to share?
So we went to Agile quite automatically because while listening to you, I was referring lots of these like phenomena to the Agile world and how that world has been trying to solve some similar issues and how that world is organized. And one idea that we threw in the air is because in Agile organizations we do have Agile coaches for teams, and they're there, and it's a continuous process of coaching. Then are we going towards that direction of actually having permanent coaches and in-house coaches who are, or maybe we're talking about a team of coaches, maybe a teams of teams and teams of coaches.
But that's just the conversation we were having just now. That to take the managers and actually make the managers into real coaches for the whole system.
Right.
Difference with Agile. An Agile coach, and interestingly, only 10%, according to the Agile Foundation, only 10% of Agile coaches actually coach. They instruct. But if you have, but if you've got the managers now operating in a role where they do coach the whole system rather than the Agile coach focusing just the team, now you can get a much greater flow, and they can be a real positive way of being role models, basically, of the behaviours they want from everybody else. So I think there's real positivity from taking and making Agile work the way that it could, if only it were better designed.
Yeah, probably depends on how you define Agile coaching.
Of course.
And how, because their job is to help the team improve their performance, right? That's the overall definition. But then, of course, we have different approaches to that.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm teaching Agile coaches to become coaches as well. So that's why it's
Yes. Well,
close to my heart.
I think there's a movement here now to get Agile coaches to become real coaches.
Yes.
And I ran a workshop in Singapore 18 months or 2 years ago, specifically for that, because with a whole crowd of them, because basically they had no coaching skills, and I think that will help, but it's still focusing on the individual team, and I think we've got to step away from that and actually look bigger and look at the whole system, and that's what doesn't happen at the moment with Agile.
It's systemic Agile coaching.
Yeah. Next program, name of the program.
Yeah. It's actually Agile stands for another good idea lousily executed.
But Agile coaching at its best, I have to say, is systemic, because as a coach, you would also help the team to discover different blockers that are that they have from the outside and
Yeah.
Just was curious about your reference to the 10% rule. Was it a gut feeling, or was it a reference to a study?
It was a figure I was given by a bunch of Agile coaches in the States. So I've not gone back and checked it out, but that was the figure that they said that they'd had from the Agile Foundation. Or what there's a number of Agile organisations. There's one big one in the States, though, isn't there?
Agile Alliance, Scrum Alliance, or something?
No, I don't know. Yeah. But worth looking up.
Okay, any other reflections, questions, or summary about your table group, whatever you discussed, some thought? Everybody's looking somebody else. Please help me. I don't want to take.
Could you
the
do
role.
this? Could you step into this role with the coaching skills you have now, or would it need something more?
Well, we were talking about visualization system for the, so that you can somehow grab the phenomena of the system, perhaps some kind of dashboard or what kind of aids would you have to somehow see through the system and get information where to, for example, connect or where to have effect on it.
So if we define coaching as helping people to have the conversations that they need to have, then as coaches we can help people within the system to have those conversations. And if we help the system, if we help people within the system work out what does the system look like and who do they need to have the conversations with, then that's part of a cycle that we can create. So most of the coaching skills that we have are applicable, but what we should have to now put on top of it is an understanding not just of systems but of systems of systems.
Yeah. And we were talking also about the team of coaches, but we thought that it would require quite a lot of resources to affect, for example, the company where you have a lot of teams and
Yeah.
you have to have resources for coaching.
Yeah, and building on the visualization part of the discussion, that it's really important to sort of share and to commit to the picture that we have drawn. Because not only the team of coaches, but also like the management and like all teams, that they actually agree on the picture that we all draw together, or whatever visualization it is. Because otherwise it won't be just pushed through the improvements or whatever.
Yeah.
needed.
I almost, I mean, obviously this is, I'm sort of exaggerating, but to some extent one could almost say it's time to think about getting rid of managers entirely and just replacing them all with coaches. While that may not be entirely possible, if we did have fewer managers and more coaches, we might actually achieve a lot more in organisations. Now there's a controversial statement.
But actually, we talked about Agile before.
Yeah.
That idea has been introduced in the realm of Agile a long time ago. If you've heard of Scrum,
Yeah.
which is the most popular
Yeah.
Agile software development model, Ken Schwaber, who was one of the fathers of this model, wrote in 2005 in his book Enterprise and Scrum about how an enterprise could be organized entirely through this Scrum model, which consists of 3 roles, which are the cross-organizational development team, the product owner, which is the role responsible for creating the backlog of work to be done, and the Scrum Master, which is the coach. And the idea was to scale this triangular model to the entire organization, so that all the leaders basically are either coaches, which is the Scrum Master role, or people who work for the prioritization of work, which is based on conversation with the stakeholders. It's sort of it's a task where you congregate together the people's ideas of the value creation. So in this model, the leaders are basically coaches.
Yeah, it's where it all breaks down, it's great. It works if you have a project-based organisation, and that's where it all comes from, and that's where it works best. But where you've got an organisation which is basically where all the structures are about doing routine things, where you're not doing projects, you're basically delivering the same product and it's the same people. You might get, if you're in a retail shop, you might get different clothes in, but essentially you're not trying to constantly innovate. You're trying to be consistent. You're trying to maybe make marginal improvements. But if you're flying an aircraft, for example, you're not allowed to suddenly make it all up and change the way that you do things. So I think that what we have to do is find ways to make this work in structures and organisations which are not about constant innovation, where stability is actually more the driver of functionality. And most organisations are more like that than like project organisations. So I think that's why it's all sort of got so limited. Now, we can overcome this. I think we can apply principles like this to think about it, but if we're dealing within a bank, Agile has worked to some extent in the IT departments of banks. It's been an abject failure in every other function. I've never seen an example of it working. But
there are a few big organizational transformations, especially in the bank field.
Yeah, and then it would work in that area because you're doing something radically new.
But that's really at scale.
Yeah.
So we do have a few good examples.
Yeah.
At least two of our biggest banks are desperately trying it at the moment.
Yeah.
And in Holland there are a few very successful cases as well.
But it raises some interesting issues. I'm still learning tremendously about this and finding what has been done in other contexts. And there is a lot, but it's all piecemeal. It's all spread out in bits. It's never been brought together. And that's what I think is so fascinating, the opportunity to bring it together and do it in a way that's coherent. And we were talking about, I've talked with some banks about doing one of this. We got so close to actually getting it off the ground and the budget was withdrawn. But we were talking about the optimum size being between 30 and 50 people, so that you can actually create a unit where you can demonstrate this stuff. And in this case, for the bank, it was going in Ireland. It was going to be so it would be a regional area, so that you could see everything happening within the regional structure, and how people responded. So that I think there was 8 branches with just under 50 people in them. So it gave you a sort of sense of scale. And the jobs weren't that different, so that you could have a lot more easier to get shared purpose. They wanted to start small, basically, and we'll get some experiments in due course.
So can I build on something that you guys said about kind of representation of like how to draw a picture of the situation? Made me think of a tool that we went through in the business coach course, Suhdekartta. Like, have you ever used this relationship map?
Oh yeah.
Which you could draw within a team. That would be super interesting to have somebody, I don't know who, but somebody drawing this relationship map of the relationships between the teams.
Yeah. Well, there's a technique called strategic network analysis, SNA, which does this, which is computerized, and it looks at the interconnections between people. And who your close connections. So it's the frequency of interaction you have with other people, and mostly it works on email, but also it works on on record, because that's the way you can measure easily. But it also about recorded conversations you have with people. So who do you connect with most frequently? And so these connected, and what they've been able to look at is the impact of that. And in fact, the study I saw just recently looked at the impact of coaching by using strategic network analysis to see how did the coaching of a manager affect the organisation or the people around them. And that was quite interesting because it came up with some unexpected results.
Like?
Just trying to remember. People's welfare or sense of well-being was pretty much all the way right through the chain. Even if you were very close or a bit more distant, you would be. There was positive feedback from the coaching. However, people's perception of the quality of conversation that they had with people got worse the closer you got. So if it was your direct report, they would say that the quality of conversation they had with you was worse. And the reason they argue that they've basically tried to, their explanation for this is that people have got so used to having conversations, which are nice, comfortable conversations where your boss tells you what to do. Now suddenly the boss is actually asking questions which make you think and are more demanding of you, and therefore it takes there's a lag between over time before they get used to the new kind of conversation that they're having. But that was it was produced by the IOC, the Institute of Coaching at Harvard. So it was quite a recent article too. Yeah, that I thought that was fascinating. So don't maybe that tells don't measure the impact on the team immediately.
In our table, we were discussing about this shared purpose. So it's something that it's come from so-called outside, like owners or some management will tell about in this model where to go, or is it something that the team should create primarily by themselves? That okay, do we want to grow by 20% or something like that, or how do you can you talk about that?
It should be an iterative process, and it's most effective. And so clearly, somebody up here in the organisation, the leadership team is there to interpret the needs of the stakeholders into some kind of mission statement. This is what we're trying to achieve. And then as you broke down into smaller teams of teams, so a block of say 10 teams, immediately reporting to each one of those directors, you might find that they will have they will bring that broad purpose and try and interpret it to the system. But what tends to happen at the moment is each layer completely changes it. It might have the same words, but it has a completely different meaning for them. And sometimes the big mission statement up here has very little relevance to somebody at the bottom. Our mission is to become the biggest clothes retailer in Europe. Has absolutely no importance to somebody who's selling jeans in a store in Silo. I mean, it's daft to think that it would. So it's actually finding a mission that actually links to the overall mission of the organisation, but is meaningful to people within the system that system of teams collectively. So it's taking the individual team's purpose, the collective team's purpose, and then the organisation's purpose, and finding a way to mediate so that they are all aligned.
And who does that? Does the team together, or is it like the leader, the pinpoint role, who is now doing the interpretation?
Well, at the moment it doesn't happen, or not very often. And I think it depends who's got the energy to do it, who's got the responsibility for doing it. I mean, it should be led by the top management. But
should it be led by the top management?
Sorry?
Should it really be led by the top management?
As I was saying, in a way,
it should be sponsored by them at least, but
not
necessarily led.
In a way, the way that organisations, the way coaching is going, it may be better for top management to learn the art of asking the right question rather than giving the right purpose. So, how will we give our patients in a hospital the best possible care we could?
Then if I come to my original question, then the top management doesn't give the direction, they ask the questions. They ask the people to come with the direction, and now I'm asking them is the way to do it. I don't know.
Yeah. So forget answers, focus on questions. That's different, isn't it? But again, it's a coaching mentality. Any other thoughts? What can you do with this? What will you do with this? I mean, it's quite a challenge. So, are you going to go back and say that was very nice and forget about it, or?
Previously mentioned that one should not focus on leaders, but to lead.
Yeah.
And I think there's something which I think might interest us as coaches. How do we focus on something that's actually it's an abstraction. It's a kind of a social structure, and it's much easier to coach one-on-one with someone
Sure.
instead of coaching something that's actually not real. It's just in people's minds and in their interaction.
I agree. And this is where the team coaching and the individual coaching come across each other and interlink. Because if we can have the conversation with the team leader, okay, how should leadership be exercised in this team? And then help them to have the conversation with the team as a whole. So how you distribute the responsibilities, what do you really need to do? Then you can then we are coaching the whole system through the team leader, and also from a commercial point of view, it actually helps us to go from one-to-one coaching into team coaching very quickly. But it's a way of looking at the conversation that needs to happen as a conversation that links the two worlds. You know, how do we actually create? How do we actually make leadership happen in the most effective way? So I'm going to go back to the challenge. How are you going to use this? What are you going to do with this, if anything? Have you had an OSM?
What's that?
An OSM? Oh shit moment? That's one of the acronyms I'm so proud of having contributed to the world of coaching.
I'm having it now.
Sorry?
So say it again, please.
OSM? Oh shit moment. Yeah.
Oh shit moment.
And it can be positive or negative, of course. It's just, it's what coaching does. It's suddenly you realise that things aren't the way that you thought they were.
It definitely helps to keep in mind the bigger picture.
Yeah.
I think now we're talking about
Systems of systems, not just the system, yeah.
Yeah, and how easy it is to forget all these dynamics
Yeah.
when you're focusing on coaching a team. I mean, we talk about systemic all the time, but still, there's so much more to that.
Yeah. And in a way, you know, you're talking about Agile. This is a way to make the concepts behind Agile real for the organisation as a whole. So there's limitations to Agile, but if we start putting it into this bigger concept, we can actually start to say, okay, this is part of Agile, and then becomes a real part of the solution. But actually, we've got a much bigger game to play here.
That's actually very important. I personally work in the world of agility every day, and the trend of Agile has been there for 2 decades now. But as of recent years, people talk about so-called business agility very much. It's like the today's trend, and it basically means taking the principles from the IT area to the outside of that. Which, well, you're talking about it, right?
Yeah. Yes. Great. What about this time? How are you going to use this?
For me, it seems that it's really like a changing of culture and mindset about the leadership. Start to talk about that with my clients, like really having dialogue about the future and talking about the basic things before we can go on changing something, understanding the philosophy and the values in this. So that would be what I would.
Great.
I think that I have been wondering, I'm interested in power. We have not mentioned too much of power. Mapping, for example, who has power, what is power, how power is utilized in company, and how do people perceive power in the company and others who are having power. So we haven't touched that too much. We have been talking about communication and so on. How do you see the question of power in this context?
I think I'm having to think about how to respond to that. Power is something that can be used for good or ill. And distributing power is generally a good thing. Distributing power too much is not, because then nothing happens. Yeah. So it's more an issue of balancing power and responsibility. So distributing power, but also distributing responsibility. So power without responsibility, or power without accountability, is always destructive, no matter where it's based. Hence Donald Trump. I was telling Raphael in the car come over here. George Washington said, "I cannot tell a lie." Donald Trump said, "I cannot tell the truth." Boris Johnson said, "I cannot tell the difference." So there's a great guy called Barry Oshry. I think it's Barry. I think it's Oshry, and his book is called Seeing Systems, and it's one of the best books I'm aware of analysing the power systems inside organisations. And he talks
Here
about
is the book
Oh, you got
if
it.
you want to look.
Yeah. He talks about top, middle, and bottom, and the conversations that do and don't happen between them, the assumptions they make about each other. It's a lovely book, a very, very nice model to use. So, any other thoughts? Well, how about some of the others of you? How might you be using this? How might you use it?
Where or why?
Well, how? Why? Whatever question. Choose the question you fancy.
In our organization, we are just making new structure, new teams and subgroups also. And I was especially thinking about those subgroups.
Yeah.
And this flexibility. Maybe I got some ideas to organize them in a new way. And I also saw that we have a direction we are moving to. There are good elements. They are recording this theory partly.
Great.
It was nice to know this.
Okay. Well, we can share the slides. If you,
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
in practice, in my work,
Good.
I would use.
any more?
Okay.
I'd like to voice one point of view that we actually had in a previous conversation in this table, which is the fact that, at least I personally in my work, often encounter the situation where people in the organization, or people in the teams, do get the importance of doing organization development on the level of what you have been talking about today. But the question comes, when do we do it? We are not allowed to spend our time to development stuff. We have to focus on our productive work that we are paid for. And that is really an everyday issue that, for example, I encounter. And it's an obstacle for...
Well, we have a partial solution for that, and that is to put in the output objectives or the performance objectives of every leader, the requirement that they get rid of at least a quarter of their job every year, in order to make space to doing things which are really important. And so you have to take what I did this year. So I'm only going to do 75% of those things. I'm going to create 25% of my time to do things that really matter. And I'm going to delegate them. I'm going to make them obsolete. I'm going to cut out meetings that aren't valuable. But essentially, you get measured on how much of your job you get rid of each year. It's a very powerful incentive. I can see you like that one.
No, I'm trying to connect the dots.
Okay, all right, that's fine. But I think it's one way that we can do it. People are so busy doing the job that they do that they just forget that actually they have a responsibility to take. If they're going to do things for the future, they have to stop doing things that focus on the past, on the present. So we have to constantly be reshaping. If the world is changing and our job is not changing, something's out of kilter.
All right, actually it is 7 p.m. So thank you very much, and we don't have any hurry to you can stay and reflect and continue discussing, but hey, let's have an applause to David.
Thank you
very much. Thank you. Yes.
There we go. Good.
Excellent, excellent.
Good.
Very interesting topic.
I hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah. Good.
I like to stir things up.
That's good. That is your mission.
Absolutely. Yes.
Adding a lot of OSM.
Yes, exactly. I can see that was you like that one. Yes.
Okay.
It's nice to add to the English vocabulary or the international vocabulary. Yeah.